Welcome back to Before the Day Ends. We're glad you're with us today. So last time we were in chapter 18, the second half of the third book of Matthew. And we talked about not causing others to stumble. Right? We had this passage about the millstone being hung around our necks if we cause others, these little ones, to stumble. So we move on from there in this chapter to talk about forgiveness. What happens when someone causes us to stumble? What's our response? We'll take a look in chapter 18 in verse 15. It says, "If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone." So I want to point out two things. Number one, this doesn't say that if you sinned against someone else, this is if someone sins against you. So if someone sins against you, you go and point out the problem. It doesn't say to wait around and hold a grudge. It doesn't say to wait around until they ask for forgiveness. It doesn't say to wait around until something happens. It says you go to them and point out the fault. Now, why do you go alone? Well, if you think about it, the whole point is to not cause others to stumble. It's not make a big deal, not to post it on social media, not to let everybody know, not to create gossip, but simply to go to them. Because if you think about it, if you did something wrong to someone else, isn't that what you would want? That instead of them telling all their friends and their parents or their grandkids or whatever, they come to you. Because if it's just you and the person, you might be able to work it out. Now, if you do that, and that person is still unrepentant about what they did, it says, well, then take someone with you. Again, keep the circle small so that it doesn't get out of hand. You give the person the best chance possible to do the right thing. Don't try to bully them into doing the right thing. Encourage them through your actions, through bringing a friend maybe, to do the right thing. And then it goes on to say that if that still doesn't work, then go to the church. But the whole point in chapter 18, 15 through 20 is to focus on the good of the person. Yes, they sinned against you, but your response is very, very important on how you can bring forgiveness and also not cause them to stumble either. Okay, I want to focus today, though, on the next statement. So Jesus says, if another member sins against you, here's the process, right? You go to them first, then take a witness, and then you go to the church. So again, focusing on the other person. So then Peter says this. Then Peter came and said to him, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? And Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but I tell you 77 times. Or 70 times 7. So what's going on? Peter says, okay, great. I get it. Jesus, if someone sins against me, I go to them directly. But how many times? Like, where's the limit? And this is the same question we dealt with last time with the idea of the millstone, right? The idea of who are the little ones? Who do I have to watch out for? Same question of the Good Samaritan. Who's my neighbor? Who do I have to watch out for? Who can I exclude? Who is not my neighbor? Who is not the little ones I have to worry about? Who do I not have to forgive? And it's the same question of exclusion. Right? Where are the boundaries, Jesus? Where do I have a limit? Where's the line? Where can I just write them off because they've offended me too many times? Well, in Judaism, the number was 3. If a person, stepped on your toe for the 4th time, you can tell them to hit the bricks. But here Peter says, well, you know what? I will over double that. I'll go as high as 7. Jesus says, no, not 7 times, but 77 times or 70 times 7. It's the same thing in the Greek. So what's Jesus saying? That at 491 or at 78, that you're okay to write them off? No. Remember that numbers have meaning. So we talked about the feeding of the 4,000 and feeding of the 5,000. In the feeding of the 5,000, the 12 basketfuls left over meant something, right? The tribes of Israel. In the 70 or the 7 baskets left over at the feeding of the 4,000, we said that that's the number of completeness. The Gentiles have been brought in. So the number 7 means complete. So 70 times 7 or 77 is not an actual number. It's the idea of like you keep forgiving. There is no boundary. There is no limit. We continue to forgive. Because think about it. Isn't that how you want to be forgiven? More than just 7 times? So it's about not having limits and boundaries. And to prove the point, Jesus goes on and tells this parable. Verse 23. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. And as he could not pay, he ordered him to be sold together with his wife and his children and all his possession, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the Lord of that slave released him and forgave the debt. Now, that's a huge amount of money. 10,000 talents. If you do the math, and I have, in today's numbers, it's about $7 billion. This guy could not have paid that debt. Period. It was outside of the realm of possibility for him to pay that debt. And yet the king had pity on him, released him, and forgave him. And in fact, it's very repetitive here in the text that it's all about him. He released him. He forgave him. It wasn't about the amount of money. It was about the person being forgiven. So forgiveness is not about the debt. Forgiveness is about the person. God does not forgive sin. God forgives us. Let me say that again. God does not forgive sin. God forgives us. And the same is true then for us. How many times do we get hung up on the offense that we totally write off the offender? We focus on what wrong was done to us instead of focusing on the relationship we have with the person. Let's see what happens next in verse 28. But that same slave, as he went out, again, this is right after it happened, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him by the throat, he said, Pay what you owe. Then this fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, Have patience with me, and I will pay you. But he refused. Then he went and threw him into prison until he could pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their lord all that had taken place. Then his lord summoned him and said to him, You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you? And in anger, his lord handed him over to be tortured until he would pay his entire debt. So my heavenly Father will do also to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Kind of a scary story. Not just because this guy wouldn't forgive 100 denarii, which is, next to nothing, but the king revokes forgiveness. Right? The king had forgiven the debt, but now he revokes the forgiveness and has this person put in jail for a debt he couldn't pay. Jesus says, that's going to happen to you, right? If you don't forgive your brother and sister. Because you think about it, Jesus gave his life. God bankrupted heaven to pay my debt, to pay your debt. So how can we hold a debt over our neighbor, over a brother and sister, when we have been forgiven so much? And it's a powerful reminder that God doesn't forgive sin, God forgives us, and we are to do the same. We can't get hung up on what was wrong, or the betrayal, or the insult, or the selfishness, or the anger. We can't let those debts keep us in prison because we won't forgive them. As God forgives us, we are to forgive others. We don't focus on the sin, we focus on the person. And how many times? Well, 70 times 7. Because that's how God forgives us. I mean, that's how we want to be forgiven, right? We keep making mistakes and doing things wrong, and we ask God to forgive us far more than 70 times 7. We are to do the same for others. Forgiveness is an act of will, not a feeling and not an emotion. It's what we choose to do. We choose to forgive that person who has offended us. And we go when we begin the process. We don't wait for them to apologize. We begin the process as God sought us out first while we were still sinners. God sent Jesus.